The first head-to-head debate. Big policies being unveiled, manifestos being published. After a slow start, we have, at last, a general election campaign.
Does the truth matter in this election?
I think it does, and I think it's very important.
We will have a referendum, we will have negotiation.
The two men who would be Prime Minister got a less than prime ministerial reception in last night's ITV debate.
Just at the start of this debate, the Conservative Party changed its name on Twitter.
Tory party headquarters came under fire for masquerading as Fact Check UK.
No one gives a toss about the social media cut and thrust.
While the smaller parties expressed their discontent at being excluded from the debate.
What we had was the kind of bluster and diversion from both of them, frankly.
We shouldn't allow either of these men to determine our future.
The Greens launched their manifesto.
We can take the first step down the right path.
Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems paraded their pitch to business.
We are postponing further cuts in corporation tax.
We believe that any form of Brexit will be bad for jobs.
It is sometimes claimed that I am anti-business. Actually, this is nonsense.
Mr Corbyn faced a tough question on his handling of anti-Semitism.
And show that Labour isn't just for the many but not the few.
No Labour government led.
The Labour leader was also under pressure on immigration.
There will be a great deal of movement.
A great deal of movement, so free movement will not end.
Go on. If anything...
For the Prime Minister, this from the woman accused of favouritism because of their close relationship.
It was not just a sexual intention, so I sent him a text. Is this the price of loyalty? To be hung up on, ignored and blocked?
Did he reply?
No.
Today, a manifesto policy slips out.
I mean low tax for people, for working people, cutting national insurance.
I'll be talking to the Conservatives about their latest plans.
Joe Swinson.
And as the Lib Dems launch their Stop Brexit manifesto, pledging a multi-billion-pound Remain bonus for public services, Lib Dem Deputy Leader Ed Davey joins me live. Good evening. We're live from Westminster, where nobody can now be in any doubt that this is a Christmas election, with the parties falling over themselves to stuff our stockings with goodies. Santa Jezza is promising free broadband when his state-employed elves get a hold of BT. Beneficent Boris today maxed out the Tory credit card with an expensive promise to cut national insurance. Jolly Joe of the Lib Dems is offering free childcare and a legal spliff in every stocking. But what she really wants for Christmas is to banish Brexit. All the parties are promising billions more for public services. Hang the expense, it's mainly being done with borrowed money anyway, so no worries. And today's party leaders will probably be long gone when the bills finally land on the voters' laps. So enjoy it while you can. Merry Christmas, one and all. Help yourself to a free Rolls Royce. Now, as I mentioned, we had a major policy announcement today from Boris Johnson. It was on national insurance. It's not clear whether he actually meant to make this announcement, but anyway, this is what he told the BBC.
If we're lucky enough to be re-elected, so the first budget we will go up to the 9,500 threshold, and that will, as I say, put £500 into the pockets of everybody. We will then take a further step and we'll set out the timescale at the budget in up to 12,500.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Conservative Minister Brandon Lewis. So there we had Boris Johnson there telling the BBC that raising the threshold for national insurance contributions to 9,500, it's about 8,600 at the moment, would save taxpayers £500 a year. Sounds good, but there's a problem. It's not true, is it?
Well, it's 8,632, I think, to be precise. And yes, the first budget will go up to 9,500. What the Prime Minister was outlining is that in due course, our ambition is to get to 12,500.
No, he wasn't. What he said was,
£500 a house.
In the first budget, we will go up to the 9,500 threshold. That's raising it by just shy of £1,000. And that will, as I say, put £500 into the pockets of everybody. It's not true, is it?
Well, I hadn't heard that interview until literally you just played it. What I can say to you is the numbers as I understand them to be, and what I've seen in the calculation is we're going to move the first budget to 9,500. That's
and how much will that be worth?
That's the equivalent of about £100 per person.
No, it's not.
Okay,
it's not.
My understanding is about £100
It's worth about £85 a year. Okay. We spoke to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and we did this when when Mr. Johnson, as he was then, promised this in the Tory campaign. So it's £85 a year. This is worth, not 500.
Well, I haven't seen the IFS's calculation. Our calculation is it's worth about £100 per person.
Well, can we both agree it's not 500?
No, our ambition is to get to 12,500. That would be worth about £500 per person.
But he said 9,500. I mean, look, last night you set up a spoof fact-checking account on Twitter, but you're not so good at fact-checking your own facts, are you?
Well, I'm giving you the facts very clearly now, I think, Andrew, which is this initial budget will move it to 9,500. That's a tax cut for about 31 million people of £100 a year. Our ambition is to make sure they're £500 a year better off by moving it further. But let's also be very clear about last night. As your clip just showed, that was always very clear that it was from CCHQ. Its Twitter handle was still CCHQ Press.
It's just a pity they didn't fact-check the Prime Minister saying it's worth £500
I think if you look
when
at
it's closer to 100 and we think 85.
Well, I think if you look at what that was referring to in terms of that debate last night, it was quite rightly calling out some of the misrepresentation from the...
But you're misrepresenting what the value of this increase of the threshold is. It's not 500, it's under 100. You think about that, we think 85, so does the IFS. Now, the idea is to take low earners out of national insurance. I get that. But how much of the cost of this cut? It's about $2 billion just to go to 9,500. How much actually goes to the lower earners of that $2 billion?
Well, it's about 31 million people because that national insurance, and it will apply to people who are self-employed as well.
I understand that, but the purpose of it is to help. Right. Yeah. How much of the $2 billion that this will cost, round one, helps low earners?
Well, low earners will also benefit from that. As I say, average is about £100 per person.
No, but I'm saying how much does it cost of the $2 billion? How much do they benefit?
I'm not outlining to you today what the overall cost of this is. That will all be costed through and published in our manifesto, which we'll launch shortly. And
we know the cost. If you raise the threshold to 9,500, you lose about $2 billion in national insurance revenue. And what I'm asking is, how much of that $2 billion actually goes to the lowest earners?
Well, I can't answer specifically right now on that because what I don't know, Andrew, is exactly what proportion of those learners... Well, let me just finish the point. Obviously, everybody benefits. The 31 million approximately all benefit from moving from 8,632, I think it is at the moment, to 9,500. So anybody who is earning that figure or above will benefit. The degree to which they benefit obviously depends on exactly what they're earning.
But only 10% of the lost revenues benefit the lowest earners in society. Only 10%.
Well, I would argue this is a very progressive way of cutting tax because it is one that helps everybody and make sure that the proportion obviously is more for the people who are the lowest earners. And that's why it's progressive and why it means it actually ends up being a tax cut for about 31 million people.
But if you really wanted to help low earners, the most effective way of doing it would be to increase in-work benefits because all that would go to the lowest earners. It would top up their pay. Why not do it that way?
Well, we're changing and been gradually changing the entire benefit system to make sure that it works for people, encouraging people and making it always pay to be in work. That's what universal credit is about. That is also obviously very fair for the British taxpayer who pays for it. What we're doing, this is all part of a wide package of things we've done. We've increasing the national living wage. We've increased, obviously, the personal allowance that people get, that 12,500 as well. Our ambition is to get the national insurance threshold to the same point. So it helps everybody, particularly the lowest earners. And as I say, it's also quite important. This will help those who are self-employed as well.
Can I just check, is it your policy, your ambition, your desire to get to the 12,500 national insurance threshold in the lifetime of this coming Parliament?
Well, we're not setting out a specific time frame for that yet. I think it's right to be clear with people what our ambitions are, the journey of travel we want to go on. We're going to do that in an economically appropriate, fiscally sensible way.
So tell our viewers tonight that you'll get to the 12,500, which, by the way, then would be worth £500 to people in the lifetime of this Parliament. It may just be 85 and that's the end of it.
Well, we're going to do the 85, well, you say 85, we think it's about £100 per person in the first budget, get up to that 9,500. We're also giving people that journey of travel, where we want to get to. As I say, as part of our wider package, over 30 million people are benefiting from tax cuts, or some being removed from tax altogether. I think it's a good thing and benefits those on the lowest salaries.
The Prime Minister, when he was campaigning for the leadership of your party, he mentioned raising the national insurance threshold. He also was very keen on people who pay the higher rate of tax at 40%, doing so at 80,000 rather than the current 50,000. Is that Conservative policy?
Well, you're tempting me into announcing the things from our manifesto before we've published the manifesto.
Well, you've done already, so why not?
Well, the Prime Minister, the leader of the party, has the right to announce statements and to announce policies when he's ready to announce them, and he's done that today.
So will this be in the manifesto?
If you look at where he made that announcement today, that was a direct answer to a question from somebody who wanted to know how our policies were going to affect them. I think it was quite refreshing to have a Prime Minister who's prepared to just answer the question for that lady today. But all the further announcements we're going to make around our policies, whether they're tax or elsewhere, people will see very, very soon in our manifesto.
He said, as a matter of principle, when he was campaigning to be leader, Conservatives should give tax cuts to the middle class. They should cut the taxes of head teachers, senior nurses and police inspectors. Is that Conservative policy?
Well, what we've announced today, what the Prime Minister announced today, actually reduces the tax burden for those people.
Yes, but he was talking about raising when the 40% rate.
I understand, Andrew. And as I say, you're tempting me towards what may or may not be in our manifesto. Today we've announced this, along with our big package for victims of rape and domestic abuse, making sure we bring people to justice and do what we can to support victims.
All right. Let me ask you.
I'm going to save the manifesto for when it's launched.
Well, let me ask you another announcement that has been made, so you don't need to hide behind the as yet unpublished manifesto. Mr. Johnson said in the summer, every time corporation tax has been cut in this country, it has produced more revenue. Now he says that by not cutting it, he'll save $6 billion. Both positions cannot be true. Which is it?
I think it's a fair question, actually. I remember discussing corporation tax with Andrew on your show back in 2017.
And what's the answer?
It's absolutely right that reductions in corporation tax have seen the income, the quantum, go up. I absolutely agree.
So why, by not cutting it, do you get $6 billion more?
What I was just going to go on to explain, Andrew, is what the judgment call we've made is there's always that point. There's a balance you have to find at which you then start to get the diminishing returns or actually the reverse effect. We've taken a view that we've got the most generous corporation package of all the parties. It's one of the most competitive in the world. And we want to focus our support for small to medium-sized businesses. So if you remember, when the Prime Minister announced this, it was also in the context of our full review of business rates, support for R&D, support for construction, which really does drive GDP.
Are you now saying that if you had cut the corporation tax to 17%, which was government policy, endorsed by Mr. Johnson, you would have actually lost revenue?
I'm saying that we have taken the view that at this point in time, rather than reducing corporation tax, we decided to focus our tax benefits for businesses on those small and medium-sized businesses that need that extra help, while still having a competitive rate of corporation tax. It's the most competitive of all the parties out there, which is why people will continue to invest in this country.
All right. Brendan Lewis, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's talk now to the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. She's at the Lib Dem manifesto launch at a nightclub in North London. She gets out and about, you know, while we're stuck here. Laura, can you tell us, we got this announcement on national insurance, on raising the threshold, just been discussing it with Mr. Lewis there. Was this meant to be announced, or was it just blurted out?
Well, first off, I should say, Andrew, this is a very serious election, of course, but it looks like I am in a nightclub because I actually am in a nightclub. The Lib Dems had their manifesto launch here today. I think there's still a mystery about whether the Prime Minister meant to blurt out that big, serious announcement about changes to national insurance or not, or whether actually it was a slip. Because rather gloriously, he was challenged by a member of the public, one of the workers in the place that he was at on Teesside, who asked him very directly, if you're going to cut tax, are you going to cut tax for people like you or people like me. And he, you know, unusually, you might suggest, answered her question very directly. But it's very possible, of course, that he made a last-minute decision to say, you know what, let's get this out there. And if that means that people spend 3-4 days talking about the Conservative manifesto before it's published, well, so be it.
The Liberal Democrats launching their manifesto, that's why you're there. There's a sense the Liberal Democrats now need to gain some momentum. I would suggest it won't be helped that their manifesto launch will now be overshadowed by Prince Andrew's announcement that he's stepping down from public life.
That's right. I mean, that's an enormous story, and it broke literally moments before the 6 o'clock news when, you know, Jo Swinson's commitments, her big, ambitious and expensive manifesto was going to be, you know, detailed in all its, with, you know, all the things that they want to do, all their big Stop Brexit message. And also it's the Labour manifesto launch tomorrow. So the Lib Dems had a sort of news window, which, like it or not, is part of any election campaign. It's just the coverage and the amount of discussion there is of anything is, of course, to an extent dictated by what else is going on. So clearly, that announcement from the palace will, you know, squeeze out a lot of what they are trying to get across. But I think, you know, even before that, there was a sense around this campaign that while they started off quite starry-eyed, you know, every time Jo Swinson was near a microphone, she would talk about what she was a candidate to be Prime Minister. Listen carefully to Lib Dems now. What they're talking more about is that they believe they're the party to deprive Boris Johnson of a majority. Now, that reflects really a pivot in their campaign. They feel that they have been squeezed a bit because their dynamic changed in all of this when the Brexit party said they wouldn't stand against the Conservatives, because what looked, Andrew, which you and I have talked about before, was quite a scrappy, confusing, unpredictable four-way race, has, with that changed, kind of narrowed to be a really sort of tangly two-party race. Of course, the SNP dominant in Scotland. But in terms of the national race, it does feel very much two-party now, with the Lib Dems really challenging to get in on the side.
Okay.
And that's why, though, a lot of attention is turning to what she would do in the event. To hear from her on that today.
All right, Laura, thank you for that. We are not going to discuss Prince Andrew. We are going to discuss the Lib Dem manifesto. We're joined now by the Deputy Leader of the party, Ed Davey. Welcome to the programme. Now, you talk of a Remain bonus of £50 billion because you think the economy is going to grow more quickly if we remain in the EU. But the reality is that even if you did get that extra growth, and it's only a forecast, you will have only an extra £14 billion to spend in 2024-25, correct?
Well, yes, but let's look at the reason why we get to that number. It's actually really good. All the forecasters say that by staying in the EU, by having access to the single market, by being in the customs union, economic growth will be stronger than if you have the hard Brexit deal of Boris Johnson. And that extra economic growth brings tax revenues, and over the lifetime of the Parliament, we calculate it at 50 billion.
Right. But it's not 50 billion to spend. You think GDP, the national wealth, will be more. It actually gives you, it's in your own table, 14 billion to spend. It's a 14 billion bonus.
No, it's not. That's 14 billion in the final year of the Parliament.
Yes.
And if you add up all the bits from the rest of the Parliament, it's 50 billion.
Oh, but that's Gordon Brown's double counting again.
But
the fact is,
you've not been listening, because
that is you will have 14 billion more to spend.
Andrew, this is a non-point. We've been saying this from the start. And let me tell you how that 14 billion will be spent. 10 billion will be spent in schools, investing in our children, getting more teachers, 20,000 new teachers we've announced today, and the other will be for in-work poverty. We want to make sure that the universal credit does what it was supposed to do, and that's why we're going to restore the work allowance for people on universal credit. And you were just interviewing the Conservatives. Their promise today won't help the poorest in work. Our promise will. So we're really going to tackle inequality, and that's what about nearly 4 billion of the Remain bonus will
But actually, you get 14 billion more by 24-25 to spend because of the so-called Remain bonus. If you get that growth, it's not guaranteed.
IFS says cautious and reasonable.
Yeah, but you know, forecasters are forecasters, and then you can't take them to the bank.
But you were praying the IFS aid a minute ago, and now I'm praying it.
You are raising almost 40 billion with increased taxes. Higher corporation tax, higher capital gains, higher income tax, higher taxes on flying. That's much more than the Remain bonus. 40 billion from increasing taxes.
There are some increasing taxes.
40 billion.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because guess what? Money doesn't grow on trees. And we're hearing from Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn all these lavish spending promises, which you talked about at the top of the programme, and they're not telling people how it's going to be paid for. I make no apology as the Liberal Democrat Shadow Chancellor for saying that our investment in health and social care will be paid for by putting a penny on income tax.
Right.
We want to make sure that money is real. When you listen to the Conservative and Labour Party, it's pretend money. It's
you're
fake
going
money.
to borrow a lot as well.
Well, only for capital spend.
Sure.
We've
well,
made
that's
a very
what they're going to do too.
No, well, they're borrowing for some of their current spend, it appears.
Well, actually, I don't think it does appear. But anyway, let me just see where you're going to get this money from.
We have a distinction between current spending,
I know
which
that.
are covered by taxes,
I understand
and
all that.
capital, which is sensible borrowing.
But you claim that a 1% rise in corporation tax to 20% will raise an extra 10 billion. That's nonsense.
No, it's not. It's from IFS figures.
No, I'm sorry, it's not. IFS figures do not show that a 1% rise in corporation tax gives you 10 billion.
Let me help you. In the government's budget, they had assumed corporation tax would come down by another 2%, because that was stated government policy, and that was in the government
And they're not
figures.
doing that.
And they're not doing it. So therefore, we can take that money back, and that's basically that's the revenue from 3
So your
billion.
manifesto is already out of date?
No, it's
because
not.
it's at 19%.
No, because the base level.
And you don't get 10 billion.
It's very simple, Andrew. Let me explain it very slowly for you. You take the baseline.
You don't need to be slow, you just need to be accurate.
Well, we are being accurate, because let me explain. We're taking the baseline from the government figures. And the government figures assume that corporation tax will go down by another 2%. So because you've got that money, because that's not going ahead, that's where the 10 billion comes in. It's very simple.
We shall see. Your plan is also to raise an extra 5 billion on advanced passenger duty, the flight tax, in fact. So vote Lib Dem and you get far higher airfares.
Well, you do if you fly an awful lot. But if you fly once or twice a year, you'll see your duty going down.
How are you going to count that?
Well, what we're going to do, let me explain. For the first flight, the second flight, you'll pay less under our regime than the current regime.
But how will you know?
But because people's passport numbers, when they're checked, it'll go on a system. We're going to consult for a year to show how we're going to do that.
But the passport doesn't show where you're going.
Well, we're going to have a system which we're going to work with the airlines to be able to control and gather that data. Let's remember, the airline systems have the most sophisticated databases.
So you're going to monitor the flights we take and then tax
No, you won't know the destination. All you'll know is the fact that that flight has left, someone has left on a return flight from the UK. That's all you need to know to collect this tax. It's very, very simple. And what it means is those people who fly an awful lot, and it's less than 15% of the population who do more than 70% of the flights, those people will pay a bit more.
But people who fly a lot are often people getting out, winning export orders for this country, getting investment, working for Britain. You're going to tax them and you're going to double the tax. The tax currently brings in 3.5 billion. You're going to add another 5 billion. That could mean a £1,200 tax on a long-haul business flight.
Yes, and
1,200.
Yeah, and tell you why we're doing it. We're doing it because we have to reduce demand for flights. If you're serious about climate change, if you listen to the Independent Climate Change Committee, they say if you're serious about climate change, you need to reduce demand for flying. And they say that if we don't, by 2050, emissions from the airline industry will be the biggest emissions of any sector. And so what Liberal Democrats are saying is we are serious about tackling climate change.
Right. And you're going to tax flyers massively. In many cases, the tax on the flight...
If you like the explanation, I'll give it you.
In many cases, the tax on the flight will be more than the airfare. That's Lib Dem policy.
And only if you fly an awful lot. For the first few flights...
Only if you're working for Britain.
No. Listen, what we're worried about is ordinary families who go on their annual holiday. We don't want to tax them. In fact, we're reducing the tax on them. And what we're saying is those people who are very wealthy, who fly an awful lot, they can afford this.
Let's move on to Brexit. Do you accept that the only way you get a second Brexit referendum is with a Labour government?
No. And I'll tell you why.
How would you?
Well, let me explain. The most likely result, I think, looking at the figures, is probably a minority Tory government. We can argue about that. Just accept that for a second. If it's a minority Tory government, Boris Johnson says he wants to deliver Brexit.
Well, he can't if he's a minority.
Indeed. And so the only way he could do that is with a people's vote. And so we will challenge him and we'll work with others to say, if you want to do what you said, Mr. Johnson, you never can quite trust the man, I totally agree on that point, but if you want to do what you said, work for a people's vote.
So you're counting on Boris Johnson to agree to a people's vote?
No, listen, not only. Who knows what's going to happen the next
Well, you're the one that suggested it. If it's a Labour government, if it's Labour as the largest party...
very unlikely, but there we are.
If it is... you would then allow them to attempt a renegotiation and then get a referendum.
Not a question of allowing them.
Well, it is.
No, what we've said is we don't want to put, and we won't put, either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn into number 10. We disagree with them on Brexit and we disagree with them on many other things. And so, therefore, what would we do? We would vote issue by issue.
Sure.
Whoever is in the minority government, and we would vote on the Liberal Democrat manifesto, whether that's to stop Brexit, whether it's to tackle climate change, whether it's to invest in education.
But if you want a second referendum, you would need to keep Labour in till they delivered that second referendum. Otherwise, you wouldn't get it.
Well, not if Boris Johnson was willing to actually just do what he said he's going to do. If he wants, which he says he wants, if he wants to deliver Brexit and he hasn't got the votes, the only way he's going to be able to do that is to put it back to the people.
So let me just get this right. I mean, I know you're in favour of legalising cannabis. You really think that Boris Johnson's going to give you a second referendum? That's your approach?
Yeah, but you answer this question, because this is the real question.
No, I ask the questions.
What is he going to do if we stop him? And the real interesting
Probably
thing,
hand over to Labour and get them to form a government.
The real interesting thing in this election, it's Liberal Democrats who can stop Boris Johnson getting the majority. If we win seats off the Tories, and we're really going for it across the country, we can stop Boris Johnson getting a majority, and through that we can stop Brexit. And I'm really proud that it's the Liberal Democrats who are the Remain party in this election.
If you get a second,
who can actually save our country from this disaster.
If you get a second referendum, would you change the franchise for it? Would you give votes to 16-year-olds? Would you give votes to EU citizens?
I'm in favour of both of those.
So these would both be in place for the second referendum?
Well, we have got to... It's in Parliament. I would love, and what your assumption, and I agree with your assumption, that we'd have a majority Liberal Democrat
So you would
government.
change the franchise for the second referendum?
Andrew, if you're assuming now that there'll be a majority Liberal Democrat government...
I'm not assuming that. If there's a majority... Mr Davey, no, that's not. If there's a majority Lib Dem government, you've told us you would revoke Article 50, not have a second referendum. You don't even know what's in your own manifesto.
I'm glad you brought that up, because if we do have that majority, if we do have that big swing...
Yeah, but you're not, so let's not waste time on it.
Well, but it was a premise of your question.
No, it wasn't. It was not. It was a second referendum. You don't get a second referendum if you ever formed a majority. You revoke. You get a second referendum if there's a Labour government. Let me ask you this, though. You think you can raise $1.5 billion a year by legalising cannabis? You'd licence it through outlets. It would be limited strength weed. But possession of cannabis of any strength wouldn't be a criminal offence. You know what happened in California with that policy?
Well, there are many other places that have actually had a similar policy, whether it's Portugal, whether it's Holland, whether it's Canada. And what we would do, we would spend the first year getting the legislation through, consulting widely, and looking at all the evidence that we've seen where this policy has
Well, let me
worked.
give you the evidence in California, which is what they've done,
so we probably
which is
like
that the legal market has been undercut by the black market. So that's another hole in your budget. You'd probably get nothing like 1.5 billion.
Well, I disagree with you, because you're suggesting that we'll do it like California. Actually, there are places that have done it differently, and we would want to follow the evidence.
But what you're suggesting is what California has done. You are following, whether you know or not, the Californian model.
Well, guess what? Where things haven't worked perfectly in other places, you adjust your policy to learn the lessons. But you can still show that this can have benefits on things like health, because I'm really concerned about young people's health. I'm also concerned about breaking the criminal gangs, because one of the reasons why I think it's outrageous the Conservatives and Labour Party won't face up to this issue is I think they're playing into the criminal gangs.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. We ran out of
unacceptable.
time. I'll be back here with Politics Live at 12:15 tomorrow, and on Monday on BBC One at 7:30, the first of my series of interviews with the party leaders. Bye-bye.